voice for this. I'm pleased to welcome everyone here tonight for the fourth and last night of Darwin Week. This is the 8th annual Darwin Week. We're very happy to bring in tonight Dr. Michael Shermer. Before I introduce him, just a few orders of business. Please hold your Q&A until the end. We'll allow probably 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A depending on how late the talk goes. And then afterward, if you want to continue the conversation, we'll be headed over to Beck's on the Hill. So you'll be able to continue the conversation, ask Dr. Michael Shermer any questions you have. As well, we'll be selling Darwin Week shirts at the back of the room at the end of the talk. Once those are gone, they're gone. We'll never print that design again. So please support our organization and buy a shirt or donate in any way you can. With that said, I'd like to introduce Dr. Michael Shermer. He teaches a transdisciplinary course for doctoral students at Claremont Graduate College entitled Evolution, Economics, and the Brain, and an honors course for undergraduates at Chapman University. As you can see on the slides, he is the founder of Skeptic magazine. You may know him from TED Talks. He's done a number of those to millions of views, and he's published in research journals such as Nature and Science. He's appeared on the Colbert Report, on Charlie Rose, Larry King Live, and many others. And he's also hosted his own 13-episode series on television, Exploring the Unknown. And he's been host on Discovery, the History Channel, Science Channel, and many more. Please welcome Dr. Michael Shermer.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for having me. Is our live stream going? Hi, live streamers. The universe is watching. So I am Michael Shermer, the publisher of this magazine, Skeptic Magazine. We're the quarterly publication of the Skeptic Society. We're a 501c3 nonprofit science education organization devoted to investigating claims of the paranormal, pseudoscience, fringe groups, and cults, and claims of all kinds between good science, junk science, bad science, voodoo science, pathological science, non-science, and plain old nonsense. And unless you've been on Mars and abducted by aliens, there's a lot of it out there. Nonsense, that is. Every issue of the magazine has a particular theme to it. We did one on the future of intelligence. Are people getting smarter or dumber? Well, I'm from Southern California, so I have an opinion about this myself. But it turns out IQ scores are going up about 3 points every 10 years for the last century. So we're talking, almost 2 standard deviations in the course of the century of people getting smarter. That's super smart. That's a lot smarter than me. So, you students out there, you have to solve the problems of aging, Alzheimer's, and all that before, we baby boomers hit the wall. We did one on artificial intelligence. When will computers achieve human-level intelligence? And we concluded that we're 5 years away, and always will be. At least 10 years ago we did that particular issue. We did one on Scientology. Is it a cult? Building right there in Hollywood where we could go visit and check it out. But what is a cult? What does that even mean? What's the difference between a religion and a cult? One of those kind of interesting questions. My answer is about 100 years. And 9/11, was 9/11 a conspiracy? Yes, it was. By definition, 19 members of Al-Qaeda plotting to fly planes into buildings without telling us ahead of time constitutes a conspiracy. The 9/11 truthers think it was an inside job by the Bush administration. Anyway, you know how we know that it was not an inside job by the federal government? Because it worked. We do a lot on climate change, global warming. Are you a global warming skeptic, or are you skeptical of the global warming skeptics, which would make you a believer? What does it mean to be a skeptic in any case? It just means we take a scientific, rational approach to claims. With every particular claim we ask, what's the evidence for it? What's the quality of the evidence? Who's presenting the claim? How does the claim work with the way the rest of the world works that we know of? And how does it fit with the prevailing worldview, and so on and so forth? So there's no one answer. I mean, it could be that global warming is real, or maybe it's not. I mean, that's an empirical question. We can answer the question with science. Same thing with tonight's talk on evolution and creationism. Didn't have to be evolutionary. Theory of evolution didn't have to be true. Just turned out the evidence is supportive of it. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we're talking about skeptics. You can join by going to skeptic.com and sign up, and you can get the latest diet myths, and you can meet our dog, the skeptical dog. He's very skeptical. So happy birthday to Darwin. And it's February 11th, but in England, it's already the 12th, so close enough. It's his birthday, the 207th birthday of Charles Darwin. He was born in this house. His father, Robert Darwin, was a physician. His grandfather was also a world-renowned physician and philosopher, Erasmus Darwin, who actually wrote a book about sort of kind of evolution, more of a sort of philosophical treatise on it, which is about all there was at that time. In a place called the Mount, it's still there. You can go to the house. This is where he was born, in his bedroom. It's now a county seat for records where they keep files and stuff, but they let you go in there if you ask nicely and walk around a little bit. This is the grammar school where he went to in Shrewsbury. It's sort of south of western part of England. The statue was not there when he was a student there, obviously. Here's his education at this Unitarian church in Shrewsbury, founded in 1662, goes way back. Unitarians, as you probably know, are pretty liberal on their theology. So to the extent that Darwin was a believer, which he was, until well into his sort of midlife, he was a pretty liberal theology, pretty liberal religiosity, not a super what we would call fundamentalist kind of thing. So it made it a little bit easier for him to slide away from religion as he developed his scientific ideas. He's most famous for, of course, the Beagle voyage, 5 years on the road, so to speak. It was a voyage designed to circumnavigate the globe and primarily map the south coast of South America for the Royal Navy, and for maps and charts and things like that. And so they just took Darwin along, not even as the naturalist. They already had a naturalist. He was just the companion to the captain. Read that as you will. somebody of the upper classes educated to talk to, basically, a companion. Because in the upper parts of the military, you're not supposed to talk to the lower ranks. You don't socialize with them, that kind of thing. So Darwin was sort of the intellectual companion to the captain, Robert Fitzroy. And of course, as we know, he went around here. Darwin spent most of the time on the land. He was constantly seasick. Here's his ship. It wasn't particularly big, so it got tossed around a lot. That particular island right there is part of the Galapagos Islands. They are 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. They're currently owned by Ecuador. If you want to go, it's well worth a bucket list trip for sure. You just fly to Quito or Guayaquil. You have to spend the night there, spend a little money in the hotel, pay the little fee to help fund the very poor country. Galapagos is the most expensive, best thing they have for fundraising to survive. And you fly out there and you land on one of the little islands, and then you get on a boat. And there's 64 different places where you can go legally and hike around. And you have to have a guide with you. You have to stay on the path. And they make sure you don't take other species with you. Don't take your cat or bugs or anything else, because there's already too much species contamination there. And so Darwin first landed on this little island. At the time, they had British names at the time, because that's who was basically running the show back then. But then when the Spanish took over, they got Spanish names. So Chatham Island, also now called San Cristobal, is where one of the places you can fly into from the mainland, Puerto Recarrezo Moreno. These are volcanic islands. There's two kinds of islands. There's continental islands. They're just really part of the continent. There's just water in between, unless it's an ice age, in which case the water goes away, and you just walk there. Versus volcanic islands, just a hot spot in the crust of the earth that lava builds up until it breaks the surface, then it's an island. These are volcanic islands, 600 miles off the coast of Ecuador. And so Darwin sailed around here, and he landed right near that little spot right there, which is right next to this extinct volcano called Cerro Brujo. And there's a little beach right there, and he spent the night right there on that beach, his first night in the Galapagos, in September 18th, 1835. How do I know that? Because I spent the night there too. Me and my buddy Frank Sulloway and a couple of other troopers there, we took a 3-week voyage around the islands, basically retracing Darwin's footsteps. Part of one of Frank's projects is to track how Darwin figured out evolution. It's a myth that he discovered evolution when he was in the Galapagos Islands, so we will debunk that myth shortly. But one of the things he discovered when he first got there, Darwin was much more interested in geology than he was natural history or biology. He read Charles Lyell's great work, Principles of Geology, on the way to the Galapagos. And so he sort of deduced from first principles how certain islands develop. So if the crust is moving like this over the weak spot, the hole in the crust, and the islands are popping up, and the crust moves. There's another one here, and the crust moves, another one here, crust moves, another one here. That's how you get a chain of island volcanoes like that. And that's what that was. So that was Cerro Brujo. That thing here used to just be by itself surrounded by water, so it was an island. But the flow of lava kept coming down, and filled it in, and now it's connected. And if you look at these Galapagos Islands, that's all they are. They're just volcano, filled in, and there's a whole string of these things, and that's how the archipelago operates. So it was kind of Darwin who put that together when he got there. He wrote about this in his journals. By the way, when you go there, there's no water. You have to take your own water. So mostly what we have at our backs is about 70 pounds of water to last about 3 to 4 days at most. And if you run out, too bad. Well, you have a satellite phone just in case, but good luck with that. And but we had Darwin's his diary with us, copy of the diary, and so he made this little diagram of that's that side of Cerro Brujo and this little volcanic plug, the inside of the volcano. So what happens is the volcano comes up, and then the waves hit it for millions of years and erode it away, and you're left with that plug. It's a harder material. And so that's what this particular thing is here called Kicker Rock. And there's Darwin's diagram. It's just a geological map. It's not supposed to be visually accurate. It's just supposed to be geologically correct, different kinds of rocks that you see there. As you can see, his handwriting is really clear and easy to read. Frank can read it. I can't read it, so I just kind of asked Frank, what's he say? And I tell you, one of the days we spent, pretty much every day, it's on the equator. It's right on the equator. So the sun comes up at 6 a.m., sun goes down at 6 p.m., boom, that's it, lights out. There's not much to do, and it's hotter than hell and humid and miserable. So you hike all day, and then you collapse in your tent for the rest of the night. This is why I know Darwin didn't figure out evolution when he was there. He's too tired to think about it. And plus, but he was like in his 20s when he went. That helps. I was in my 50s when I went. But one of these things where we just spent the whole day just collapsed, and I read in his diary, he described the same thing as a long walk. Oh, a very British, understated way of saying this was a hard trip. Anyway, so this is from his book on the Galapagos, the chapter on the Galapagos Archipelago in his journal of the Voyage of the Beagle that he published after he got back. There's a picture of that actual Kicker Rock. It's a pretty clear diagram that he made of that. And he wrote in his notebook, this is how we know he did not discover evolution when he was there. He wrote, I have not yet noticed by far the most remarkable feature in the natural history of this archipelago. It is that the different islands, to a considerable extent, are inhabited by a different set of beings. So he's not thinking they came to these different islands and they filled different niches by evolution. No, he's not thinking this at all. He says, my attention was first called to this fact by the vice governor, Mr. Lawson, declaring that the tortoises differed from the different islands and that he could certainly tell from which island anyone was brought. So, for example, Hispaniola has tortoises where the carapace is really high. So the way they eat the cactus fruit, so they sort of crawl along. Again, there's not much water, so they get their water from the cactus pads and the cactus fruit. So they stand up really high, and they reach up to get the cactus fruit. And that's, in that particular, so it's good to have a carapace like that. Other islands where you don't need that, the carapace is slightly lower. This one's higher. This one's rounded. Anyway, the point of that was that the governor realized, I can tell you which island that species is from. Really? Yeah, but Darwin never noticed that when he was there. He didn't make what does that mean? Why would that be important? Hang on to that. He's famous for, of course, the finch's beak, the beak of the finch, and how the different beaks are evolved, specialized for eating different seeds. But Darwin didn't know that at the time. He was not recording that. In fact, Frank here went back when he was researching this and found Darwin's original specimens in the museum at Cambridge and looked out to see if Darwin had kept track of which islands they come from, and he didn't. And then Darwin, when he got back, so that was September 1835, so the next year he's back home in 1836, in the spring of 1836, and he starts making notes, opening notebooks. He goes to see this guy, John Gould, to show him his bird collection. Sorry, that date is incorrect. Anyway, and Frank found Darwin's notes. Again, it's kind of a mess. You can see he doodled a little hedgehog head there upside down, which is kind of And anyway, you can't read, but Frank deduced from that it was there. He's sitting there talking to this guy going, oh, wait a minute. Because school guy is asking, well, which island did that come from? I don't know. You don't know, because that's really important. Okay, why is that important? All right. Here's some of his actual specimens of his finches. And here's an entry in his ornithological catalog about his mockingbird collection. When I see these islands inside of each other, and possessed of but a scanty stock of animals, tenanted by these birds, but slightly differing in structure, in filling the same place in nature, I must suspect they are only varieties. He's using the word suspect as in believe. Like, I suspect you're telling the truth. I believe you're. I suspect they're only varieties. Okay. So he means similar varieties of fixed kinds, not evolution of separate species. Darwin was still a creationist. Okay, so the prevailing theory at the time was that God created species in fixed kinds, and they don't change. But clearly you can see that they do vary somewhat. Dogs are big and small because they're bred, pigeon breeders breed. But nature does this too. You can see that some are smaller, some are bigger, so forth. But they're still the same species. So the prevailing theory of evolution, as it were, was that it was kind of a selection against the ones that are way out on the edges of the bell curve. So you have a sort of bell curve shape of variation in a kind. And that nature just sort of weeds them out on the end, so you keep getting the fixed, it stays pretty much the same. And that's what he was thinking here. Okay, so the tortoises vary, but they're still fixed. They're just varieties of fixed kinds. This explains why Darwin did not even bother to record the island locations of the few finches he collected, and they were never specifically mentioned in the Origin of Species. In fact, same with Darwin's collection of the magnificent Galapagos tortoises. Instead of recording all the islands and locations of the specimen, they stored them in the bowels of the beagle, and they ate them on the way to Australia. Darwin ate his data. If he was an evolutionist, he would at least record it. Okay, why is that important? Okay, well, so he finished the voyage of the beagle. He goes home. He gets married. He marries his cousin, Emma Wedgwood. Why not? Because that's the kind of thing people did back then. And the Wedgwood family, very famous, wealthy, the Wedgwood China. And his grandfather and her grandfather were buddies. Anyway, it's one of those sort of old 19th century English way of like a Jane Austen novel kind of thing. And that's his home. That's the first home he bought. And you can go there now. It's still there. It's about 16 miles south of St. Paul's Cathedral, downtown London. So at the time, that was a long ways. Now it's right there. And he started having kids and so on. In the meantime, he's got little sheds on the side of the house where he did his work. And he opened a notebook. He had several of these notebooks. You flip it open. And he started making diagrams. Like, here's some of his notes. And this is the most famous diagram he made that gave us a clue when he first figured out the branching nature of evolution, adaptive radiation. So a species starts off here. Let's say it lands on one island from Ecuador, and it manages to get out to just one of those islands. And then from there, it branches out. The offspring somehow, they survive, they fly over here, or they swim over to this other island, and another one goes in that way. But these islands are different. If you're on the windward side of the island versus the dry side of the island, I'm saying that correctly. The rain side versus the dry side. The climate is completely different. So you're going to have different adaptations for those different climates. If you're higher altitude, like 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet up, it's very different than being on the coast. So they're different adaptations. So he starts to figure that out. I love this. He says, I think what? Ooh, tantalizing notes. I think he's figuring it out. This is called adaptive radiation. This is how species are formed. You can even get a tattoo now. It's so famous. Although she forgot the I think, which would be cool right there. So it ends up kind of being diagrammed like this. You get a particular ancestor of a finch that flies out from the mainland and lands in one of the islands, and then it branches out to different islands. Different adaptations for different environments. So there's the basic kind, and then the beaks differ, the wing lengths differ, and so on and so forth. And that's the first official rendition of that in his book, The Origin of Species, in 1859. It's a fold-out, which is kind of cool. And so again, just take species A, and it just branches off, and it can go this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, this way, and go this way, and go all the way up here, and end up over there, or maybe it ends up over there, and so on. So you get this rich diversity of life just from one little, so these are called founder populations. The founder starts off, maybe it's just a single female with an egg. It's impregnated, boom, off she goes and starts a new, or a bird flies out there, or a pair of birds, whatever. We know from all those massive hurricanes and tropical storms in like the Malay Archipelago, they carry huge chunks of earth. I mean, just football-sized fields, just floating along from one island to the next. And on those big clods of dirt are animals. That's how they get. They hop islands this way. So that's how it happens. So in 1859, so he gets back in 1836. And so we're talking 1859, we're talking over 2 decades. What was he doing? He was building his case for the theory of evolution. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Creationist model was the prevailing paradigm at the time. The extraordinary claim was that's not the explanation. It evolved. Well, there are already theories of evolution. I mentioned one. There's half a dozen others, and they were all bogus and debunked, and no one believed it. So he had to really pile up a lot of data, a lot of evidence. And that's why this book took him so long to write. And he wrote so many people. We have thousands and thousands of his letters to and from Darwin, in which he would write people like, yeah, I had this idea. Have you ever seen anything like this in this particular species of bird or worms or whatever? And then they would write back, and he'd like, okay, and he'd make a note of that. And this is how he wrote his book. He just piled up these little notes and letters and things like that. It's very interesting. And he even has a chapter, chapter 7, Problems on Theory. And these are all the objections that his friends came up with that they didn't accept, and so he then would think about it and then write an answer. And then by the time the book is published, he's heard every rebuttal there already is. There's nothing that a critic could come up with that he doesn't have a Marco Rubio 25-second rebuttal. Boom, I got it, boom. Current affairs reference. There were 1,250 copies of that book published in the first print run. Not just the first edition, but the first print run. And so that was gone within the first day. It was bought up, plus he had it sent out to all his friends and people that he knew that this could be influential. And so those now go for about $150,000 a piece. And just as a little side story, and when we started the Skeptic Society in the early 90s, a biologist called me out of the blue one day, just wanted to help out. He's sort of a retired biologist, and said, I have a first edition of all of Darwin's books. I wondered, would you like them? And I kind of knew what this was worth. I said, well, you shouldn't do that. You should sell it for retirement. No, I want to give it to you guys. So we had it evaluated right off his taxes. At the time, it was like $80,000, and I waited until 2009, nervously having this book in my fireproof safe, hoping my dog doesn't get to it or something. I don't really want to have this book. So I finally sold it in 2009 for $125,000. Now worth about $150,000. That all went to the Skeptic Society. So that's kind of a cool thing. That's not even the most expensive antiquarian scientific book. Newton's Principia is several $100,000, more than that. Anyway, so that's just a little side story. You can get first editions that are not the first print run, that are slightly less money, and then you can get second editions and so on that are not expensive at all. Okay, what does it say? Here's the boring part of the talk. I just sort of go, what's in the book? I'll just tell you what's in the book. So one, he defends that evolution happened. That as organisms change through time, both the fossil record of life's history and nature today document and reveal this change. Okay, so things are changing through time. How do they change? Descent with modification. Evolution proceeds via branching through common descent. Offsprings are similar to, but not exact replicas of their parents. This produces the necessary variation to allow for adaptation to an ever-changing environment. 3, gradualism. The change is slow and steady and stately. Given enough time, millions and millions of years, this can account for species change. This was a problem in Darwin's time because even without the creationist model, the geologists could not figure out that the Earth could be that old. It just didn't seem, even if the thing started off red hot in space and cooled for millions, it's not going to be billions of years. It's going to be hundreds of thousands of years, maybe a few million. They didn't know about radiation and what the core was really made of, and so that's another story. Multiplication of speciation. Evolution does not just produce new species, it produces an increasing number of new species. Just think of that branching thing, went out, and out, and out, and out, and you end up at the top with all those different species. And then finally, natural selection, the process of evolutionary change co-discovered by Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace, which operates in the following manner. Oh, here we go. Here's how natural selection works. Populations tend to increase indefinitely in a geometric ratio. You got 2 organisms, and 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 5, 12, 12. Boom. But that can't go on forever. We live on a finite planet with ecosystems that have a limited carrying capacity. So in a natural environment, population numbers stabilize at a certain level. Therefore, there must be a struggle for existence, because not all the organisms produced can survive. So there's variation in every species in this struggle for existence. Those individuals with variations that are better adapted to the environment leave behind more offspring than those that are less well adapted. This is known as differential reproductive success. Okay, struggle doesn't mean you're stronger or faster. What it could be, the carapace of your shell is a better shape for reaching the cactus pad. That's all that means. It's just you're better fit for the environment. It doesn't mean fit like exercise, healthy fit. It means just a fit like a piece of puzzle in a puzzle. Okay. So let's just boil that whole thing down to just 3 words: variation, selection, and inheritance. Mom, Dad, there's something you need to know. I'm a mammal. Okay, this is kind of funny because this is not possible. There is no offspring of a reptile that ever was a mammal. At no time did a Homo erectus ever become a Homo habilis, or a Neanderthal become a sapien, or an Australopithecine become a Homo. Nothing. That can't happen. That's not how it works. It's just every generation is its own species, and the change just happens gradually over time. As Dawkins said, he defined natural selection. We always look for the t-shirt size explanation of a complex scientific idea. If you can put your formula on a t-shirt, by the way, congratulations to the gravity wave detectors, Kip Thorne at Caltech, searching for 40 years. I've known Kip since the 80s when they first started building the LIGO experimental apparatus, and I thought, oh boy, this poor guy's going to take forever to get this stuff working. It's very hard science, and we finally did it today. Okay. So that's pretty cool. Anyway, Dawkins, on his t-shirt size definition of natural selection, random mutation plus non-random cumulative selection. Okay, this is the part that everybody misses. How can you say complex life, the DNA came about randomly? It's impossible. There had to be a designer. It's not random. The random part is just the variation. It's just mutations and the mixing up of genetics. It's not random, the natural selection part. It's non-random cumulative selection. There's a selection for characteristics that survive that build over time. The key to natural selection is differential reproductive success because of heritable variance. Everyone has ancestors, but not everyone leaves descendants. Well, birds, but the dinosaurs are gone, but the birds are still around. You know that, right? The dinosaurs are birds, right? So we're told. So natural selection provided 3 key answers. So this is the key why this was important. Why does Darwin matter? He got it right, that's why. There are other theories of evolution. He got it right. 1, it explained change over time with descent with modification. 2, it explained the apparent purposive or design quality of component parts. Wings look like they were designed to fly. Guess why? Because they work. They're functionally adaptive for flight and other things. And so it looks like it's designed from the top down, like a tinkerer, like an engineer. But really, Darwin gave us the mechanism of how it can happen from the bottom up through natural selection. It looks designed because of its adaptive function. And 3, united all species in one grand tree of descent, including humans. We all have a common ancestor if you go back far enough. So it's a beautiful book. It's really a great read. You can still read it. Actually, there's an audio version that Dawkins reads, and he does a really nice job of it. Since Darwin was British and Dawkins is British, it helps to have the British accent. Puts you in the back in history a little bit. Here's the final sentence of the book, which I think is beautiful. There is grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms, most beautiful and most wonderful, have been and are being evolved. That's the only time that word appears in the book, evolved. Last word of the book. That's cool. Nevertheless, Why does Darwin matter? Okay. Darwin matters because evolution matters. Evolution matters because science matters. And science matters because it is the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we came from, and where we're going. That's the last sentence of my book, Why Darwin Matters, which, by the way, is the only book I have that has full frontal nudity on the cover. We got away with it, even in America, because 40% of Americans don't believe we're related to those guys, so they don't care. Nevertheless, the evolution wars continue. I love it. The editorial cartoonists have had quite a field day with this. This is from the Kansas Board of Education. Had passed resolutions about requiring the teaching of both creationism and creation science and evolution. But you're now leaving Kansas. Or going back. This is the intelligent design movement. I'll come back to all this stuff. Warn the neighbors, the carnival's back in town. So here you have creationism under the sheepskin of intelligent design theory run by the religious right, heading to the school board meeting. Again, these editorial cartoons nicely capture some of the themes that are going on in these debates. Teach both theories and let the kids decide. We should teach chemistry and alchemy. And let's teach phrenology and neurology. Let's teach magic and physics and astrology and astronomy. Here's the Creation Museum in Kentucky. This is Ken Ham's place, sponsored, funded by Answers in Genesis. That gives you a clue where he's coming from. Prepare to believe. But believe what? That's the question. Yes, this is the museum of the famous dinosaur with the saddle that people can actually get on and ride because they believe that dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time, which means that Mean Girls was actually a documentary. Remember the scene at the beginning of Mean Girls where she's talking about her past growing up and being homeschooled, where on the third day God created the Remington bolt-action rifle so that man could fight the dinosaurs and the homosexuals. So you go in there, then they have the 7 C's of God's eternal plan. Creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion, Christ, cross, consumption. Okay. Consummation, sorry. So you go into the museum and you can go down one hallway or you can go down this other hallway. So you go down the one hallway, God's way, and you get the timeline here that the creation happened in 4004 BC. Which was about the same time that the Babylonians invented beer, according to the corrupt materialist atheist scientists. And then there's the corruption, the fall, and the catastrophe, the flood, confusion after that, the babble of languages and all that. And then Christ comes, dies for us on the cross, and then consummation at the end of time. So it's a nice cycle. That sort of time zero, time cycle. It's a time cycle kind of thing. It comes full cycle in that metaphor. When you go in there, they have dioramas. These are exercise dioramas. Adam and Eve. They're naked, but they didn't know that was cool or bad. And so her hair is artfully combed in the right places. And then she gets tempted by the snake. And then they have fun in the bushes. And then they've sinned, so the fall. And because of the fall, then there is predation. And so the dinosaurs were actually, before the fall, they were vegetarians. I don't know if they were vegan, but they were vegetarians. And then after the fall, they knew sin, so that was the invention of predation and killing and so on. Here's Ken Ham himself with the dinosaur. When I was there, I asked him, well, how come, if they're vegetarians, how come they have those huge nasty teeth? And he said it was for opening coconuts. Okay, coconuts. They have the ark, diorama of the ark 2 by 2, and then so where were the dinosaurs? I mean, these things are huge. The ark can't be that big. They were baby dinosaurs that were on the ark. And then, as you know, the flood comes. These are the left behinders, wait. And then the floodwaters recede. There's whole theories about this. Where'd the water come from? Where'd it go? Where is it now? Under the earth, it's up in the atmosphere, it's a canopy of water, and so forth. And in fact, they're now, for this year, they're trying to raise enough money to build the Ark Park, a ship you can't sink. And so they're building this thing now, life-size. Well, whatever it really was. Pretty much, that's what most archaeologists think about this theory of how civilizations developed, all full of holes. Here's another theory. All right, so back to, you can go down this hallway, you can go down this hallway. So what they're after there is that you have different choices in your life, starting points. You can go the way of God and morality and so forth and know Jesus and go to heaven, or you can go the way of materialist science, atheism, and all that stuff down this other corrupt way. And so we all ask ourselves these big questions: why do I suffer? Why am I here? And so forth. So where are your starting point? Where you start and which hallway you go down, metaphorically. So if you go this way, you end up, for example, only 1 in 3 teens say they will continue to participate in life, church life, once they're living on their own. Oh boy. So they're out on their own. They go to college. Oh, it's really a very dangerous place, college. And then they end up, and there's this whole mural, this wall-sized mural of what happens when you accept science. No heaven, no hell, just science. The Bible versus science. Dying, euthanasia. Abortion. All sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The whole thing goes to hell in a handbasket if you go down the wrong pathway. So the question is what bothers them about all this science? Well, this was nicely captured in the Dover trial in 2004 by one of the Dover residents. I definitely would prefer to believe that God created me than that I'm the 50th cousin to a silverback ape. So there's something that bothers people about this, in addition to kind of the moral implications of a particular worldview, but also just the kind of yuckiness that we're an animal. I didn't put this together, somebody else did this, but we are primates. We are 98% related to our chimp cousins. Here's another one of these editorial cartoons. The author of this is something of a creationist. If man evolved from the ape, how come there's still apes around? Some of them were given choices. Okay, there's some of these they actually have a little hidden message. This is one of the common misnomers or myths about evolution. And the reason for this is in part because of its iconography of that. I'll show you what it looks like. It looks like this. You always see these dioramas of the great apes and humans, as if, like here in a museum, gibbons and orangutans and chimpanzee, gorilla, and us, as if, well, we came from those guys, but if we evolved, why are they still around? This is a myth. This is not what happened at all, but it gets perpetrated constantly. This is the most famous, the Time Life foldout from the 60s, really. But it just picked up the myth and carried it. This is the earliest version I've been able to find from 1925. Gibbon, orangutan, chimp, gorilla, and a cake eater. That was an insult back in 1925. Oh, you cake eater. Here it's modernized, spiritualized. It's used constantly in advertisements. Social commentary. This is back when the European Union was under debate. Some people thought that was a step backwards. Here's another. The segue is the ultimate pinnacle of evolution. Hey, what do you want from me? All I know is you're not on the list. Center for Creationism, no pets allowed, okay. Here's where the aliens came from. That's an actual theory. It's the 2001 Space Odyssey film. The aliens gave the spark of intelligence to humans. know what that is. I guess it's a cursor arrow, right? So you can see where people get this idea that's incorrect. It's everywhere. It's all over the place. More social commentary. Turned into an ad. Even the Simpsons got in on the. So the iconography is always left to right. So this one's a little odd because it's going from modern to ancient left to right. It's almost always old to new. I'm not quite sure historically why that happened, or if there's something with our brain wiring that leads us to want to draw things that way. Old to new, left to right, and so forth. So it's a little jarring when you see it going the other way, like here, or here, or here, because it's almost like they're walking backwards, which in some cases... which in fact was the theme of a very famous science fiction film, The Planet of the Apes, right? Where the astronauts go to this other planet. The entire movie they're on this other planet until the very end when he discovers what actually happened. It's such a great final scene.
Time. We finally really did it. You maniac! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
He should have had a clue when they had horses. There's what a chance of horses evolving on another planet, or for that matter. That was filmed in a beach in California, by the way. It's like, how did never mind. So the way evolution really works is it's a richly branching tree, and we're just a tiny little twig up here, not like some march toward a linear march toward us. Which unfortunately that earlier tree got rewritten such that even here with all the richly branches and twigs, look who's at the very top, the pinnacle. There's gibbons and chimps and orangs and so on. But it's almost like So the problem with this is it kind of makes it seem like we're the pinnacle of evolution. It was all going toward us. It's not. It's not going anywhere. There's no directionality to it in that big sense. We're just one of these little branches on this huge phylogenetic tree, which is actually much richer than that. This is like an attempt at one of these, and we're just that little twig right there, which if you blow up, we're just right there. Neanderthal is extinct. There we are. Right there. You know, there's all this other richness of life. It could have gone in any of those directions. There's nothing special about us. Our species dropped to about less than 2,000 individuals, maybe about 150,000 years ago. I mean, we could have easily gone extinct. None of this would be here. So evolutionary is true, provisionally, because it explains how design happened naturally, from the bottom up. It's convergent. Independent lines of inquiry all jump to the same conclusion, evolution happened. And it predicts new findings that have been confirmed empirically. So 150 years later, experiments just keep rolling in. Confirmation, confirmation, confirmation. So the extraordinary claim now would be that the creationist model is true. Evolution has now established itself as the paradigm. Life is design, yes, but from the bottom up, not the top down. It's natural design, not intelligent design. It's evolution, not creation. Okay, now let's go through just in the last quarter of my talk, and then we'll have questions. A brief history of the evolution-creation debate. It's primarily an American phenomenon. Began shortly after the publication of Darwin's book, all the way up to 1925 in the Scopes trial. That is the banning of the teaching of evolution. That was the first stage. The second stage is to demand equal time for Genesis and Darwin. That begins roughly with Sputnik and up to the Arkansas trial in 1967. And then the third stage was equal time, the demand for equal time for creation science and evolution science. You just put the hyphen, you just put a hyphen, you put the word. Oh, science. And that's roughly from that Arkansas trial to the creationism trial in Louisiana. And then finally, in the 1990s and the 10s up to the present, intelligent design theory. So let's go through these four very quickly, and then we'll wrap it up. So the first one, the banning of the teaching of evolution. There were a number of states, including Tennessee, that passed acts, laws, saying it was illegal to teach the theory of evolution in public schools. Public schools, not private schools, public schools. This is all public funding questions that involve the First Amendment and whether the government should be in the business of supporting any particular religion. That's what we're getting at here. So the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, you're probably familiar with that. That was a new organization in 1925. And they were looking around for some cause, separation of church and state, free speech, this kind of thing. And they actually advertised in a number of states that had these laws, would you like to challenge the law? And then we'll have a trial. We'll break the law, we'll have a trial, and then we'll take it to court and see what happens, and then we'll appeal it. We'll hopefully lose, appeal it, hopefully lose, go to the U.S. Supreme Court. This is what people hope, to change the law so precedent gets changed for long periods of time. Okay. And so this character, John Thomas Phelps, was a young man at the time. He was a substitute teacher in a little town called Dayton, Tennessee. He was like the track coach and from the local school. Okay, you can come teach biology, sure, fine. Okay, so he says he'll do it. So he saw this ad, or the local town booster saw this ad in the newspaper, and they thought, this could be good for business. This could be a big thing. A big trial here over the summer. It could be people come into our stores. It'd be great for business. And well, who teaches biology anyway? It's like, well, we got this young kid. Okay, maybe he'll do it. So they asked him. He goes, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And but then it got out of control. I mean, it really became a huge thing. And these two characters, Clarence Darrow and William Jennings Bryan, came into town. Clarence Darrow was the preeminent defense attorney of that age. He was famous for defending the indefensible. He was sort of, I don't know if you think of today, maybe an Alan Dershowitz kind of lawyer or something like that. And William Jennings Bryan was a 3-time presidential candidate. And if you've never heard of President Bryan, it's because he also lost all 3 times. But he was also very well known for his stump speeches defending the faith. He was a fundamentalist believer. But he was also a lawyer, so they kind of got lined up between these two characters. It was the trial of the century, the 20th century. Intel OJ, I guess, something like that. But Brian was a liberal. He was politically liberal. And liberals tend to be in favor of free speech, separation of church and state, science education, evolution. So what bothered him about this? Well, I found his final statement that he wanted to have read into the court trial, which the judge didn't let him. He wanted to make this big speech at the end, and the judge didn't let him. And then he died a couple of days after the trial. And so this got published posthumously. But what he said is the real attack of evolution, it will be seen as not upon Orthodox Christianity, or even upon Christianity, but upon religion, the most basic fact in man's existence, and the most practical thing in life. If taken seriously and made the basis of philosophy of life, it would eliminate love and carry man back to the struggle of tooth and claw. See, so this is what bugs him. Like, it isn't who cares about the age of the earth, oh, because the moment you go down that pathway instead of that pathway, then you're going to lose morality and human relations and love and meaning and so forth. Why would anybody want to do that? That's kind of the sense he had about that. Darrow, on the other hand, was fighting for free speech, separation of church and state. This was the first trial ever broadcast on radio, WGH radio. Broadcast. The turnout for this, people came in from all over different states. The Anti-Evolution League, the conflict, hell in the high school. Brian's books are sold here and so forth. The cartoonist had a field day with it. When will we meet again? Brian and Darrow. H.L. Mencken covered this for the Baltimore Sun. He was a very satirical opinion editorialist, sort of the Christopher Hitchens of his time, if you know Christopher Hitchens. Here's what he said about Brian, William Jennings Bryan. Once he had one leg in the White House, and the nation trembled under his roars. Now he is a tin pot pope in the Coca-Cola belt, and a brother to the forlorn pastors who belabor half-wits in galvanized iron tabernacles behind the railroad yards. It is a tragedy indeed to begin life as a hero and to end it as a buffoon. Oh, man. I mean, those are fighting words in 1925. Okay. William Jennings Bryan. So what's the backstory? Okay, the backstory is that he read a book that convinced him that Darwinism was evil. Because people confuse Darwin the theory and Darwinism, the application of it to political systems or societies or nations, that Darwin had nothing to do with. Darwin was really quite progressive in his politics. He was a slavery abolitionist. He was for women's rights and so on. The way it went in the decades after his death, he'd be rolling in his grave. He read this book, Headquarters Nights, by this biologist, Vernon Kellogg. Vernon Kellogg was a biologist in the First World War before the United States got involved in the war. There was a support group for Belgian neutrality, and he was part of that. He wanted to support the cause, just keep the peace, keep America out of the war, and so on. So he went over there and he hung out with a lot of the intelligentsia on both sides, French and German and so on. And there was all this talk about competitive nationalism and social Darwinism, and this war is great, it's going to weed out the weak, and the strongest nations will come out, the strongest races will succeed, and so on. It's going to be great for humanity. And he saw this as a bad idea. And Brian read that book and thought, that Darwinism thing is no good for America. I'm going to do what I can to keep it out of American schools. That's the backstory. Anyway, the evolution trial was opened by a prayer. The judge has a Bible. Oh, and Darrow was having a fit. You can't open a prayer. I mean, you're kind of biasing the case, right? And it was hot. It was in the summer. I don't know if you've ever been in Tennessee. In the summer, it's very humid. Anyway, long story short, Scope was found guilty, and he was fined $100 by Judge Ralston. That's okay. That was good. That's what the ACLU wanted. Find him guilty. We'll appeal it. Take it to the Tennessee State Supreme Court. We'll lose there. We'll appeal it. We'll take it to the U.S. Supreme Court and change the law forever. Okay. That's not what happened. In fact, it turns out that any fine over $50 had to be levied by a jury, not a judge. So on appeal, the case was thrown out. The Tennessee state legislators didn't want anything to do with this H.L. Mencken guy and all those crowds and everybody making fun of the people from Tennessee and those Neanderthals in the backwoods, blah, blah, blah. Oh, we don't want anything to do with this. So they shut it down. And that was the end of that. And that was the end of stage one. From 1925 to 1957, basically evolution was stopped from being, it was no longer taught in public school. So here's how it works. Public schools buy textbooks in mass production. There's just a few companies that print textbooks. This is changing thanks to the internet. And so whatever that's in the textbook, that's what gets taught. So the publishers thought, oh boy, let's just leave that Darwin stuff out of the last chapter. Just cut that right out, boom, we'll sell more textbooks. So it just wasn't taught anymore. So most of the great evolutionary biologists in the 30s, 40s, and 50s came from Europe, not America. There weren't many. Okay. So fast forward to 1957, Sputnik is launched by the Soviets. Americans are worried that we're falling behind in science education technology. We got to catch up. The government steps in and says, all right, we got to start teaching all the good science now. And so they started teaching Darwin. And that led to the creationists saying, okay, well, if you're going to teach Darwin, then we want Genesis being taught. So this was driven in part first by a guy named Henry Morris, there he is, with his book, The Genesis Flood. So here the case is not ban Darwin and evolution, it's evil. The case is science actually supports what's in the Bible. Look, the flood geology, the flood, the Noachian flood, it's all supported by what geologists say. Okay, he was completely wrong. No geologist accepted his theories. He was thoroughly debunked. It didn't matter. He got a movement going. And in 1967, Susan Epperson was a high school biology teacher in Little Rock, Arkansas. And she filed a suit against the state on the grounds that an anti-evolution bill passed in 1929 violated her rights of free speech. She won, but the case was overturned by the Arkansas Supreme Court in 1967 and later appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1968, the U.S. Supreme Court found Epperson in the right. So she won, and this was based on this old law that was passed back in the day, demanding equal time for Genesis and Darwin. So that was the end of that. The court viewed the Arkansas law as, and here's what they said, an attempt to blot out a particular theory because of its supposed conflict with the biblical account, and interpreted it as an attempt to establish a religious position in a public classroom. Okay? Establishment. That's the First Amendment, the establishment clause. Government shall not establish a religion. So, in a public school funded by the government, these are government schools, you can't favor a particular theory just because it's of one particular religion. Boom. On the basis of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, the law was overturned. The court ruled all such anti-evolution laws were unconstitutional. Okay, round 3. It's not religion at all. It's science, creation science. In 1981, Arkansas Act 590 required balanced treatment of creation science and evolution science in public schools. I mean, it's just really funny. It's like, okay, we don't have any science over here, but we'll just put the word in there. Just put a hyphen. We put the word in there, and then we'll say, well, we want balanced treatment. Okay, they got it. They got it. In Arkansas and Louisiana and a few other states passed these acts. This was challenged by Reverend Bill McLean, so it became known as McLean versus Arkansas. Again, it's the ACLU that's driving all these. They're backing it. They're providing the legal support for this. So on one side was science, scholarly religion, liberal teachers, and ACLU versus the Arkansas Board of Education and various creations. So this is a really important case because the judge, William Overton, ruled against the state and in favor of science and separation of church and state on the following grounds. First, creation science conveys an inescapable religiosity. You can't just put the word in there. That doesn't make it science. It's what the scientists are actually doing that makes it science, not the words. And every theologian who testified, including defense witnesses, expressed the opinion that the statement referred to a supernatural creation, which is performed by God. So he listed 5 essential characteristics of science. So this has become kind of the go-to document in all test cases. What is science? Well, what did Overton say? Boom, they put this slide up. 1, it's guided by natural law. 2, it has to be explanatory by reference to natural law. 3, it's testable against empirical world. 4, its conclusions are tentative. And 5, it's falsifiable. Falsified is another way of saying it's testable. He concluded that creation science fails to meet these essential characteristics. There's nothing to test. Just say, well, God did it. How do you test that? What's the experiment you're going to run? Where's your control group? All right. And finally, this led to the Louisiana creationism case, which also turned on the Overton 5 points there, that went to all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1987, and they voted 7-2 to uphold overturning the Louisiana law. So all of those acts and laws were overturned based on the violation of the First Amendment. Voted 7-2. So this is late 80s. Two of the Supreme Court justices were in favor of the teaching of creationism, creation science. One of them is still on the bench. Who are the two, do you think? Scalia and Scalia and Rehnquist. Now, Scalia actually made an interesting argument because the way that the creation lawyer put it was, what if you teach that the creator is just like the first law of nature? It's the prime mover. Could you teach that? And the ACLU guy was like, yeah, I guess so. So what's the difference between a personal God named Yahweh and the law of nature, the Big Bang, call it whatever you want. These are just words. If you're just talking about something that had to kickstart the universe, why can't you teach that? So you in this particular case had to show, back to the Overton 5 points, okay, it's not that they're religious. You can be religious and do good science. You can make whatever arguments you want, but are you actually doing any science? And that's what that came out. All right, so that was the end of the third stage. And I thought, because I wrote about that in my first book, Why People Believe Weird Things, I have a section on that. And I thought, well, that's the end of that. The creationists are gone. No, round 4, intelligent design theory comes on the scene. Intelligent design theory jettisons the idea of a deity altogether. Don't forget God. Don't even use the word. The designer could be anything. It could be an alien. An extraterrestrial intelligence, like in 2001, comes down, boop, pops in some life on Earth, something like that, okay? So this is one of their leading proponents, William Dembski. The Design Revolution is one of his books. I know Billy's a good guy, super smart guy, multiple graduate degrees. And he says that intelligent design is a strictly scientific theory devoid of religious commitments. Whereas the creator underlying scientific creationism conforms to a strict literalist interpretation of the Bible, the designer underlying intelligent design need not even be a deity. Okay, now, I've debated Bill, I've debated all these, I know them all personally. They're all Christians, they all think the designer is Yahweh, they do. You give a guy a couple beers, they open right up, oh, of course, yeah. And that's okay, but let's just be honest. Let's just be honest about what we're talking about here. And here's what he said in an interview. Thus, in its relation to Christianity, intelligent design should be viewed as a ground-clearing operation that gets rid of the intellectual rubbish that for generations has kept Christianity from receiving serious consideration. Okay, so what's really going on here is they're looking back at that same little history I just gave you. The people in Tennessee and H.L. Mencken making fun of them, and then the flood geologist, crazy guy that no one believed, and then they just put the hyphen science on it. There's no science there. Forget all of that. It's embarrassing. We need a rigorous, scholarly, scientific theory. Okay, this is what they're after. Okay. What's really going on is Philip Johnson, who was one of the founders of their movement, is that this isn't really and never has been a debate about science. It's about religion and philosophy. It's that worldview. What's your starting point? Where do you begin? That's really what they're after there. So I have a whole other lecture that I give for my class that goes on for about an hour and a half of all of their arguments. I just line them up one by one by one. Here's the best argument. Here's what scientists say about that, and so on and so on. Much of that came out in the Dover trial. I'll simplify it for you all in one slide. Save you an hour and a half, so we can still get home early. Okay, here's the argument. 1, X looks designed. The wing looks designed. The eye looks like it's designed to see. The wing looks like it's designed to fly. 2, I can't think of how X was designed naturally. Therefore, 3, X was designed supernaturally. That's what we call the God of the gaps argument. That's all it is. Doesn't matter what the bacteria flagellum, the blood clotting sequence, the eye, the brain, consciousness, morality, the origin, the Big Bang, the origin of the blood, whatever it is. X, fill in your blank. I can't think of how it could have come about. Well, okay, so what? Too bad. Go think some more. See if you can figure it out. Don't give up. In other words, you can't just fill in the gap with a word. That's just a word. It doesn't mean anything. Supernatural, God, it's just a word. We need an actual mechanism. How does it happen? What's going on? It reminds me of the plane problem in the time of Newton. That the planets are all in the plane of the ecliptic. And they're sort of like a flat disc like this, and they're all going around the same direction, except for Pluto, which is tilted a little bit, but it's no longer a planet. It's not a problem. And anyway, so the question, how do they all get in that position? Okay, no one knew. And so Newton, the great Newton, concluded this most beautiful system of the sun, planets, and comets could only proceed from the counsel and dominion of an intelligent and powerful being. Okay, but nobody quotes Newton on that anymore. He's the greatest scientist who ever lived. No one quotes Newton on that. You would think they'd quote him to support their position. No. Why? Because we have a good natural theory of how solar systems are formed. Condensing clouds of interstellar gas, gravity pulling all the particles in. As it begins to collapse, it begins to spin. As it begins to spin, it begins to flatten into a disk. And there's little accretions of protoplanets, of stuff starting to, some of the big ones become a single star, maybe a binary star. The little ones become little planets, and then planetoids and comets and debris, and all the way out to the Oort cloud. Boom. So we kind of have, you don't have to say it's supernatural, it happened, a miracle. No. We have an explanation for it. And anyway, finally, if you're going to go that route, you got to ask the question, well, who designed the designer? I mean, you have all these arguments about it looks like it was designed, it has characteristics of design, and so on. I don't accept the Darwinian bottom-up display. It must be a top-down designer. Okay. If the world is complex and looks intricately designed, and therefore the best inference is that there must be an intelligent designer, by the same logic we should infer that an intelligent designer must itself have been designed by a superior intelligent designer. And by the same course of reasoning, any designer who can create a superior intelligent designer must itself be a super superior intelligent designer, which itself been created by a super duper superior intelligent designer ad infinitum. You got to stop the causal chain somewhere, right? So why not just stop it at the point that we know of, right? The Big Bang, the laws of nature, boom, build from there on up, and that's what the Darwinian theory does, and that's why Darwin matters. Thank you. So you want to give a few questions?
Absolutely. Feel free to start some Q&A, and we have about 10 minutes, I think we can do that.
Go ahead.
Oh, Redquist is no longer on the Supreme Court.
Oh, okay.
But is every assertion in your book backed up by the scientific method?
Which assertion?
Anything you stated in your book?
No, I made it all up.
Well, no, well, I mean, because you said the one thing you showed the slide, and I think I did it correctly, that the Martians coming and landing on this planet, you call that a scientific theory. And I don't.
Okay, I was sort of half joking.
I know.
There
There's
is
a difference between a hypothesis and a theory.
there is a serious theory put forth by Fred Hoyle called panspermia. It doesn't really solve the problem because, well, the theory is that some bacterial grade life, say on a comet or a meteorite, managed to make the voyage across interstellar space and the Earth and survive. This is possible. There's theories about that. Maybe a meteorite hit Mars, and a chunk of Mars with some bacterial grade life just got out of orbit and circled around the sun for a billion years or whatever and landed on Earth finally.
That would be a hypothesis.
That's a hypothesis, that's right, and it's not been confirmed. So, and most scientists don't think that is what happened. In any case, even if it did, it wouldn't explain how life began in the first place. It just pushes it back one step to some other planet. How did it start there? Okay, so we still have the regress problem. The origins of life is a hard problem. But again, it's just an X. Solve for X. That's what graduate students are for. Put them on that job. Right there.
Did Darwin stop believing in creationism after his daughter died, or after he kept on his study? Because I've heard both, but I'm not really sure. Could it be both?
Yes. Well, human behavior is complexly caused and multivariate in nature. In my opinion, that he was on his way to giving up his religion entirely. When his daughter died, that pretty much did it for him. He talked about characteristics of nature he found troublesome, like the ichneumon wasp that stings a caterpillar. And it stings it on one end and plants its seeds in there, and it paralyzes the wasp, paralyzes the caterpillar, but keeps it alive. It stays alive. And the pupae devour it from the tail end all the way up to the brain. So it's just not really a brain, it's a little neural nodule. And so Darwin describes this as like, this is cruel and disgusting. I mean, you know, the early bird gets the worm. It's great if you're the bird, not so good if you're the worm. You should sleep in. In other words, nature looks cruel, and so he had a lot of arguments. This is called theodicy, the problem of evil. Darwin had a lot of problems just by nature alone that there could be a God. And then his daughter died, and anyway, but he never really embraced atheism. He described himself as just a non-theist or an agnostic. That word didn't even come into use until 1869 by Thomas Henry Huxley coined it. It just meant unknowable. You can't know if there's a God or not. And Darwin said in private, in an interview in the last year of his life, that he never spoke about it publicly because he saw no use in it. You can't talk people out of their religion anyway. What's the point of attacking religion? Just promote science and let people think for themselves. Personally, though, his wife was very religious. Emma was a deeply religious woman, and in the interest of domestic tranquility, and he really loved her, and she really loved him, and she was really looking forward to spending eternity in heaven with Charles. And so he didn't want to hurt her. I think that's very respectable. Yeah.
I was just thinking, there was a quote by I can't remember the name of the physicist, somebody was asking about the God things. It's not a necessary hypothesis for science. You know, it's just one hypothesis is not necessary. You can explain things without invoking God.
Yes, right. Well, there is the famous quote from Laplace to Napoleon, who asked him, well, where's God in your formulas? And he said, I have no need for a hypothesis. Is it a hypothesis in a testable sense? Maybe. Maybe. But at some point, God would have to reach into the world and stir the particles somehow. If he's supernatural, he's got to somehow, how does the supernatural interact with the natural? It's like how do thoughts, it's the problem of mind-body, the mind-body problem. How do thoughts cause your neurons to fire, cause your muscles to move? How does that happen? You don't need it if you're a materialist, if you're a monist. If it was just brain, it's just neurons firing, that's it. You don't have that extra step. But if you're a theist or a dualist, you have to explain that connection. How does it work? We know the laws of nature. We got them down pretty well. Fundamental principles of the standard model of physics. We know the law. We know how it works. Now we know gravitational waves too. But which one of those operates in the mind or with God interacting with our world? Okay, so that's a problem for testing that. Yeah.
Have you ever heard of the genetic algorithm?
In what sense?
So I think actually, so a lot of people don't buy like the ground up thing because of the randomness, like you said earlier. Well, there's an approach to problem solving that says this problem's really hard, and so we'll just actually do it by randomness and then having some sort of natural selection. And computers can iterate generations much faster than geological time.
Yeah.
So yeah, they got computers to play all the way through Mario. Genetic algorithm.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, there are lots of different attempts to create sort of artificial life or whatever. Dawkins did this back when computers were really quite small compared to today, and he discusses that in The Blind Watchmaker. But there's other people, Game of Life, a bunch of attempts to do this, and you get punctuated equilibrium. You get these, founder populations. There's a lot of stability, and then the rapid change, stability, rapid change. You get a lot of that. So, anything else about Darwin or God or religion or science or evolution?
It seems like the whole conflict is getting noisier than it's been, recently, especially in political realm and stuff.
I don't know. I've been following this a long time, pretty much my whole adult life. And I think the demise of the intelligent design people in 2006, the Dover trial, that really killed them. And also I think the religious right has gotten weaker. Yes, I know Cruz did well here, I guess, but not so well in New Hampshire. I think the religious right has lost a lot of its political power compared to the 80s and 90s, I think. The political movement that propelled George W. into the White House in 2000, I don't think you have to be uber religious anymore to get there. Look at Trump. He's not religious. I mean, he says, I believe that thing, that's pretty normal. What's that name of our church, honey? Oh, yeah, very, come on. Bernie, he's not religious. He's a secular Jew. He's all but said he's an atheist. And he's, okay, so, and Hillary, come on, she's not. All right, so I don't think you have to pander to the religious right anymore. That's good. That's a good thing.
I know we're short on time, but could you maybe touch base on Shermer's last law?
Oh, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, Shermer's last law. Well, the name is just a kind of tongue-in-cheek thing. I was just playing it with the idea of, based on Arthur C. Clarke's third law, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. You're probably familiar with this, like, you know about the paralyzed guy with the chip in his brain, and he can control his computer. He can run his computer just by thinking, because the chip is in the motor neurons of his cortex, and so they trained him to just think of his thought, and the cursor moves. He can play video games and answer email. It's an amazing thing. Now, if you didn't know he had a chip in his brain, it looks like he's just thinking, and the computer responds. It's telekinesis. It's paranormal. Wow, it's a miracle. No, it's a chip in his brain. If you know the technology, you see it's not miraculous. Okay, so I just kind of played with that the idea that any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial intelligence would be indistinguishable from God. That is, we think about the characteristics of God, omniscient, omnipotent, and so forth, that if you just track how much progress we've made in a short period of time, just say 100 years, computer technology or scientific knowledge, just take Moore's law of doubling computer power every 18 months, down to about 12 months now. Every Apple Mac Book Pro I buy, I buy a new computer about every 3 years, and it's the same price. I get twice the computer pretty much every 3 years for the same. That's okay. So and just think of the amazing genetic engineering, all this stuff. Just carry that out like a century, or 1,000 years, or 100,000 years of advancement. That these future artificial intelligences or anybody we encounter out there would be so far advanced than us, they would be like us to Neanderthals or us to dogs, probably. So this is another debate of the fear of AI. Could they be evil? I mean, the way AI, the curve is growing, in a century at least, they could be like we are to worms. We won't even know how smart they are. And there's not even a plug to pull because they've taken over the energy of the earth. Anyway. But so my point of that was that if we ever encountered extraterrestrials, on another subject of UFOs and Roswell, and we encounter the aliens and they're bipedal primates, they have gnarly stuff on their forehead, they speak English with an Indian accent. This is not going to happen. You're not going to run into aliens that speak English and that look like, it's just not going to happen. It only happened once here on Earth. There's a chance that some other planet with horses will be. And neither are they going to be just like 5 years ahead of us. Roswell, they gave us transistors. We went from vacuum tubes to transistors. We back engineered the alien technology. Really? Because the guys at Bell Labs are working on that anyway. So come on. They're going to be way advanced. Millions of years more advanced than us technologically. To us, they would seem like gods. This isn't my idea. It's an old science fiction idea that I just thought it'd be fun if we played with that idea. Because when I debate theists and they describe God, to me it seems indistinguishable from something that's just super powerful, super smart, that we just can't conceive of. Anyway.
I was just saying, wouldn't more likely scenario rather than extraterrestrial aliens is just archaeologists going back in time and looking at us now.
Yeah, well.
That would explain the bipedal part.
Maybe. Yes. There is some argument, to be fair, there's a counter argument to what I just said, that is convergent evolution. Convergent evolution means that there's only so many ways to navigate in a three-dimensional world on a planet with this amount of gravity and air and water and so on. So if you're a fish, whether you're a mammal or a fish or whatever, if you're in the water, you got to have kind of a streamlined body, a fusiform body, where things are kind of smooth and rounded so you can move through the water because it's thick and dense. And if you fly, you got to have light bones and big wings and a certain character, or else you're not going to do it. And furthermore, most animals have like all the brain and the sensory apparatus on one end and the waste disposal area on the other end. And why they put the recreational area with the waste disposal area, why God did that, I don't know. And you probably need limbs to move around, legs and arms, something to manipulate the environment. So there's an argument that there'd be some convergence, that if we did run into aliens, if they have technology, you gotta have something like thumbs or fingers or something to make the stuff.
You have chips.
Or maybe they're just chips in the brain. You know, to me, all of this is just, it's kind of fun sci-fi, but, you know, we're just too limited in our sample size. We only have one planet that we know of with life. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for having me.